I'm going to talk about public opinion, and the core point of my presentation is this. You can't help to build or influence public opinion unless you understand that. And I'm a researcher, and that's what I have devoted my life to, is understanding how people think. There are other people that can take that and can execute and try to deal with that and change that. But the whole premise of what I have to say is essentially you don't get there. If you don't have a roadmap, you don't know where you're going, and that's the fundamental. If there's one takeaway point from this whole presentation, this is it. This is essentially an outline of what we're going to do. In case you're skeptical about polls in general, I'm going to start with a very, very short summary of some of what we know, say from the last election, and what the polls said before the election, and answer the question, well, how accurate, not are they, but how accurate can they be? I'll see if I can get this working. This was a set of predictions that were an amalgamation of all of the available polls conducted before the 2008 elections. The states that are depicted in red were predicted to vote for McCain. The blue states were predicted to vote for Obama. And then there's a few states that are in somewhat lighter color. This still working? Can you hear me? Okay. For example, Montana and North Dakota were predicted for McCain, but somewhat more weakly. Weak Obama states, probable but not certain, were Florida, North Carolina, and Ohio. Well, and interestingly, there was one state that the polls were so completely, the average of all the polls, were so completely dead on 50-50 that this amalgamation of polls said there's just no way anybody can make a prediction. Well, the next chart tells you what happens in actuality. Every single state that was predicted for McCain went to McCain, with one exception. Every single state that was predicted for Obama went for Obama, with no exception. There was only one deviation between the final results and the prediction, and let me take you back here, and that was the state of Indiana, which was predicted, they said, weekly prediction for McCain. It actually flipped to Obama. I suspect that what happened there was a horde of people from Chicago who came and worked. And election day work by any campaign is an attempt to beat the polls, because all the polls can do is measure where people stand. If on election day a campaign has an extraordinary effort, both sides are trying to beat the polls, in effect, by having... now, if both sides do it equally, then it nets out to zero. But if one side does an extraordinary job compared to the other, you might beat the polls. The other place where there was a deviation was Nebraska is one of two states that does not have winner-take-all. You get one electoral vote for winning one of each of 3 congressional districts, and then you get an additional 2 electoral votes for carrying the state. 1 congressional district in Nebraska. I suspect, how could that flip? Probably because there's a lot of polling everywhere. How much attention was spent, how many polls were available on 1 congressional district, which happened to be Omaha. And the other thing that I find the most extraordinary finding at all is this, and that's Missouri. Do you remember where we stood 2 weeks after the election? Obama had won. They were still counting the votes in Missouri. It was so close. That's like flipping a coin and saying, I don't think it's going to be head or tails. I think it's going to land on the side and stay there. That's, to me, was the most extraordinary prediction of all. So, a couple of points about this. One is that the This was not a single poll. This was an average of all of them. So if you get more data from lots of sources, it may be more accurate than any one poll. The other thing I want to show you, this is a chart going back to January of 08 through election day, and each dot here represents a separate poll. This dot, for example, represents that on January 31st, there was a poll in a McCain-Obama heat that showed McCain ahead by 11. Okay? This poll shows one poll where Obama was ahead by 10, maybe a week or so later. Look at the pattern, and it's very interesting. In January, things are all over the map. See, this line here, the red line is an average, okay? Huge dispersion. Well, why would that be? It's early on. A lot of people haven't thought about the election. They're hearing about some people, particularly Obama for the first time, to a lesser extent McCain. It's not clear. It's not clear that either one is the nominee at that point. And the polls are all over creation. And note what happens as we get closer to November. It starts to bunch up, okay? Note what happens at the end. There's no variation whatsoever. So what I want to suggest that it takes two things for a poll to be accurate. One is that people have to have thought about what it is you're measuring. In January, not too much. By September, a fair amount. By late October, early November, a whole lot. The second thing, and this is a simple case in the case of elections, but to people understand the construct of what you're talking about. The simplest case is election. Do we understand? Will you vote? We get the idea of what voting is. McCain, Obama. We understand what all those concepts are. That's different from issues. If we're talking about an issue like affirmative action or abortion or you name it, the way you word that, people may not understand it. You may be asking about a different element about it. But an election is a special case of this where the concepts are crystal clear. I understand what an election is. I understand what voting is. And I understand I only got two choices. That's clear. That is very different from almost every other issue where we could talk about, well, for example, in the recent health care debate, are we talking about providing health care for more people? Or are we talking about government socialistic takeover of health care? The way you define your answers to that defines a lot about how you think about it. And in the case of that issue, and most issues, in no other case is it as crystal clear in the case of voting. So that I want to suggest. Two things happen. One is everybody had thought by November a whole lot about this, and they understood what we were asking exactly. And so the polls under those circumstances can be very accurate. In other cases, I want to suggest far less so.